The ballroom went silent. You could hear a pin drop. King Richard Mercer, the most feared alpha in the hemisphere, stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes, usually cold as ice, burned with a sudden, terrifying fire as he looked down at the trembling servant girl who had just spilled wine on his boots. He didn't punish her. He didn't shout. Instead, he leaned in, inhaling the scent of her hair, and asked a single, dangerous question. "Do you have a mate?" When she whispered, "Not yet," she thought she was safe. She was wrong. That two-word answer didn't calm him. It broke him. Because to an alpha king, "not yet" implies you are waiting for someone else. And Richard Mercer doesn't share. Rain battered the tin roof of the servants' quarters, a rhythmic drumming that usually helped Ivy Collins sleep. Tonight, however, sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. The entire Red Ridge Pack estate was buzzing with a frantic, nervous energy that vibrated through the floorboards. Ivy dipped her scrub brush into the bucket of grey, soapy water and attacked the scuff marks on the hallway floor. Her hands were raw, the knuckles red and chapped from the harsh chemicals she used daily. At 21 years old, Ivy was an anomaly. She was a wolf who couldn't shift. In the hierarchy of the pack, she was lower than an omega. She was considered broken stock. "Mr. Spot Runt?" a voice sneered from above her. Ivy didn't look up. She knew that voice. It belonged to Liam, the beta's son. Once, years ago, they had been children playing in the same sandbox. Now, he wore designer loafers and kicked over her water bucket just to watch the dirty liquid soak into her uniform. "I'm sorry, Liam," Ivy murmured, grabbing her rag to frantically sop up the mess before the alpha saw it. "I'll clean it up." "You'd better," Liam laughed, stepping over her as if she were a piece of furniture. "King Richard arrives in 3 hours. If he sees trash like you in the hallways, Alpha Trent will have your hide." King Richard Mercer. The name alone was enough to make the strongest warriors in the pack sweat. He was the alpha of alphas, the ruler of the Northern Alliance. Rumors followed him like a shadow. They said he was 7 feet tall in his wolf form. They said he had wiped out an entire rogue pack in a single night because they dared to cross his border. And tonight, for reasons no one quite understood, he was coming to the humble Red Ridge Pack for the annual Unity Gala. Ivy wiped the floor dry, her heart heavy. To everyone else, the gala was a chance to socialize, to find a mate, to climb the social ladder. To Ivy, it just meant extra work. She wasn't allowed to attend. She wasn't even allowed to look at the guests. Her instructions from Alpha Trent were clear. Stay in the kitchen. Wash the dishes. Stay invisible. She hauled the heavy bucket toward the utility closet, her back aching. As she passed the open doors of the ballroom, she caught a glimpse of the decorations. Thousands of white roses, imported from the city, draped over crystal chandeliers, gold ribbons, silk tablecloths. It was a fairy tale waiting to happen for someone else. "Ivy!" The sharp voice of the head housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, snapped Ivy out of her trance. "Stop daydreaming." Jessica ripped the hem of her gown. "She needs you to sew it. Now." Jessica was Alpha Trent's daughter. She was beautiful, cruel, and determined to be the one who caught King Richard's eye tonight. Ivy rushed to the upper suites. She found Jessica standing on a velvet stool, surrounded by 3 other girls who were all laughing and drinking champagne. Jessica wore a dress of crimson silk that cost more than Ivy would earn in a lifetime. "Finally," Jessica huffed, looking down at Ivy with disdain. "Took you long enough. Fix the hem. And don't prick me with the needle, or I'll have you sleeping in the kennels tonight." Ivy knelt, pulling her sewing kit from her pocket. Her fingers moved deftly, stitching the delicate fabric. She tried to tune out their conversation, but it was impossible. "Do you think he's really looking for a Luna?" one of the girls asked, applying another layer of lipstick. "Obviously," Jessica replied, tossing her blonde hair. "He's 30 years old. He needs an heir. And let's be honest, who else in this backwater pack is worthy? I'm the Alpha's daughter. It's practically a political arrangement already." "What if he already has a mate? King Richard," Jessica scoffed. "If he had a mate, the world would know. He's possessive. He wouldn't let her out of his sight. No, he's single, and by midnight, he's going to be mine." Ivy bit her lip, finishing the stitch. She snapped the thread with her teeth. "It's done." Jessica hopped down, spinning in front of the mirror. She didn't say, "Thank you." She didn't even acknowledge Ivy's presence. She simply pointed to the door. "Get out. You smell like bleach. You're ruining the ambience." Ivy retreated to the kitchen, the sting of humiliation burning her eyes. She didn't want a king. She didn't want power. She just wanted to be seen as a person. She wanted someone to look at her and see Ivy, not a broken wolf, not a servant, not a mistake. But in the world of shifters, strength was everything, and Ivy had none, or so she thought. The gala was in full swing. The music vibrated through the walls of the kitchen, where Ivy was currently elbow-deep in greasy dishwater. The staff was overwhelmed. 2 servers had called in sick with the flu, and the banquet manager, a sweaty man named Mr. Henderson, was on the verge of a panic attack. "We need more champagne on the floor," Henderson screamed, wiping his forehead with a napkin. "Table 4 is empty. The king is at table 1 and his glass is half full. Move, people, move!" He looked around wildly, his eyes landing on Ivy. "You!" he barked, pointing a sausage-like finger at her. Ivy froze, a dripping plate in her hand. "Me, sir. Put on a vest. Grab a tray. Get out there." Ivy's eyes widened in terror. "But Alpha Trent said I wasn't to be seen. I'm not dressed for... I don't care what Trent said. If the king wants champagne, the king gets champagne. Put this on." He threw a black server's vest at her face. It was 3 sizes too big. Ivy scrambled to put it on over her grey uniform. She tried to tuck her messy brown hair behind her ears. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. This was a disaster waiting to happen. If Alpha Trent saw her, she would be punished. But if she disobeyed Mr. Henderson, she would be fired. She grabbed a heavy silver tray loaded with crystal flutes of champagne and pushed through the swinging doors. The transition was jarring. One moment, she was in the humid, noisy kitchen. The next, she was in a world of cool air conditioning, soft orchestral music, and the overpowering scent of expensive perfume and alpha pheromones. The ballroom was packed. Ivy kept her head down, weaving through the crowd like a ghost. She offered drinks to hands that took them without looking at her. She was invisible, just as she had trained herself to be. "Just do 1 round," she told herself. "Drop the drinks, get back to the kitchen." She made her way toward the VIP section, a raised platform where the high-ranking wolves sat. She saw Alpha Trent laughing loudly, a little too drunk for so early in the evening. Beside him sat Jessica, preening and posing, her eyes fixed on the man at the center of the table. Ivy risked a glance. King Richard Mercer sat in a high-backed leather chair that looked more like a throne. He was terrifyingly handsome. He had dark hair, cut short and military style, and a jawline sharp enough to cut glass. He wore a tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, but he looked uncomfortable, like a tiger squeezed into a cage. He wasn't drinking. He wasn't laughing. He was watching the room with bored, predatory eyes. Suddenly, a large, boisterous alpha from a neighboring pack stumbled backward, bumping hard into Ivy's shoulder. "Watch it!" the man slurred. Ivy lost her balance. The heavy silver tray tipped. Time seemed to slow down. She tried to correct the angle, to save the glasses, But it was too late. 3 flutes of champagne launched off the tray. They didn't hit the floor. They hit the polished black boots of King Richard Mercer. The crash of shattering crystal cut through the music. The orchestra stopped. The chatter died instantly. Ivy stood frozen, her face drained of all blood. She stared in horror at the dark, wet stain soaking into the king's expensive trousers and the puddle around his boots. "You clumsy idiot!" Alpha Trent roared, jumping to his feet. He raised his hand, ready to strike her. "I told you to stay out of sight." Ivy flinched, closing her eyes, waiting for the blow. "Sit down, Trent." The voice was low, barely a rumble, but it carried more power than Trent's shout. It was a command that vibrated in the bones of every wolf in the room. Alpha Trent froze, his hand in mid-air. He slowly lowered it and sank back into his chair, pale and sweating. Ivy opened her eyes. King Richard was standing up. He towered over her, his massive frame blocking out the light from the chandeliers. He ignored the mess on his pants. He ignored the hundreds of people staring. He took one step toward Ivy, then another. He tilted his head, his nostrils flaring slightly. Ivy was shaking so hard the empty tray rattled in her hands. I am so sorry, Your Majesty. I didn't mean. I will clean it. Please forgive." "Quiet," Richard said. It wasn't angry. It was intense. He stepped into her personal space, violating all social protocols. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating off his body. He smelled of cedarwood, cold rain, and something darker, gunpowder. To Ivy, it was the most comforting scent she had ever known. It made her inner wolf, usually dormant and silent, scratch at the surface, whining with a need she didn't understand. Richard lowered his face to her neck. The crowd gasped. This was intimate. This was something you only did to a lover. He inhaled deeply, his eyes fluttering shut for a fraction of a second. When he opened them, the boredom was gone. In its place was a golden, swirling storm of obsession. "What is your name?" he asked. His voice was rougher now. "Ivy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Ivy Collins, sir." "Ivy." He tested the name on his tongue, as if tasting it. "You smell like home, Ivy." Jessica, unable to stand the attention being on the servant, stood up. "Your Majesty, please excuse her. She is just a wolfless runt. She's virtually human. She doesn't know how to behave in the presence of royalty. We will have her removed immediately." Richard didn't even look at Jessica. "If you speak again," he said calmly to the air, "I will have your tongue cut out." Jessica fell back into her chair, shocked into silence. Richard's focus remained entirely on Ivy. His hand reached out, his rough thumb brushing against her cheek. He wiped away a smudge of dirt she hadn't realized was there. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through her that nearly made her knees buckle. He looked into her eyes, searching for something. He was looking for the recognition, the spark that would tell him she knew what he knew, that they were mates. But Ivy didn't know. She had been told her whole life she was broken. She believed she didn't have a mate. She believed she wasn't capable of the bond. She just felt fear and a strange, magnetic pull. Richard's eyes narrowed. He could sense her confusion. He needed to know her status. He needed to know if anyone else had touched her, claimed her, or broken her. "Ivy," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that only she and the silent room could hear. "Do you have a mate?" Ivy swallowed hard. She looked at his chest, afraid to meet his intense gaze. She thought about Liam's bullying. She thought about her solitary life. "Not yet," she whispered honestly. She meant it as, "No one wants me." But Richard heard, "I am waiting for someone." The change in the air was instant. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The golden swirl in Richard's eyes turned into a flat, black void. A growl, deep and primal, ripped from his chest. It was the sound of a predator, realizing someone else might be hunting his prey. He snapped. His hand shot out, not to hurt her, but to grab her wrist. His grip was like iron. He pulled her flush against his chest, the tray clattering to the floor. "Not yet," he snarled, his voice booming across the silent hall. "You are waiting? For whom? Who has made you think you have a choice?" Ivy gasped, looking up at him in terror. "No, I didn't mean— Who is he?" Richard demanded, his control fraying. The alpha aura rolled off him in waves, forcing the weaker wolves in the room to bare their necks in submission. "Is there someone in this pack? Someone who thinks they can take what belongs to me?" He looked around the room, baring his teeth at the terrified guests. "If any man here has touched her," Richard roared, "I will tear him apart limb from limb." Alpha Trent stood up, his hands shaking. "Your Majesty, there is a misunderstanding. She is nobody. She has no suitors. She is defective." "She is mine," Richard bellowed, the sound shaking the glass in the windows. The declaration hung in the air. Ivy stopped breathing. "Mine?" Richard looked back down at her, his chest heaving with jealous rage. "You do not say, 'Not yet,' Ivy. You say no, because there is no one else. There never was, and there never will be." He didn't wait for a response. He didn't ask for permission. He scooped her up into his arms, bridal style as if she weighed nothing. "We are leaving," Richard announced to the room. "Trent, if you want your pack to see the sunrise tomorrow, you will have her belongings packed and sent to my car in 5 minutes." "But the gala—" Trent stammered. "The gala is over," Richard said coldly. He turned and marched toward the double doors, carrying a stunned, dirty servant girl in his arms, leaving a room full of stunned elites and a ruined political alliance in his wake. Ivy rested her head against his shoulder, too shocked to struggle. As they exited into the cool night air, she realized 2 things. First, her life as a servant was over. Second, she had just become the obsession of the most dangerous man in the world. The ride to the airport was silent, but the air inside the limousine was thick enough to choke on. Ivy sat pressed against the far door, her hands clutching the oversized server's vest she was still wearing. Richard sat across from her. He hadn't stopped watching her. Not for a second. His anger had simmered down from a boil to a low, steady heat, but the jealousy was still there, etched into the tight lines of his face. "You're shaking," he said. It wasn't a question. I don't know where we are going," Ivy stammered. "Alpha Trent. He has my papers. I can't leave the territory without a transfer order." Richard let out a dark, humorless chuckle. "Ivy, I am the king. I am the order. You are under my protection now. Red Ridge laws do not apply to you anymore." He reached into the minibar and pulled out a bottle of water, unscrewing the cap and handing it to her. "Drink." She took it, her fingers brushing his. Again, that spark. She pulled her hand back quickly. "Why?" she asked, her voice small. "Why me? Jessica said I'm defective. I can't shift. I'm nothing." Richard leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Is that what they told you?" "It's the truth. I've never turned. My wolf is dead." "Your wolf isn't dead," Richard said softly. "She's hiding. She's burying herself deep inside you because she doesn't feel safe. A wolf that is constantly abused, starved, and mocked will not surface. It's a survival mechanism." Ivy stared at him. No one had ever explained it like that. The pack doctor had just looked at her charts and stamped void on her file. "And as for why you," Richard continued, his eyes darkening again, "when I asked if you had a mate, why did you say, Not yet. Ivy looked down at her battered sneakers. Because I hoped. One day. I thought maybe if I worked hard enough, if I cleaned enough floors, the moon goddess might grant me someone who would be kind to me, someone who wouldn't yell. Richard's expression softened, the jealousy replaced by a profound, aching sadness. He realized his mistake. He had interpreted her hope as infidelity when it was actually desperation. He moved across the seat, closing the distance between them. He didn't grab her this time. He just sat close enough that their knees touched. "You don't have to hope anymore," he said, his voice sounding like a vow. "I am not kind, Ivy. I am a monster to my enemies. But I will never, ever yell at you." The car came to a smooth halt. The driver opened the door. "Your Majesty, we are at the private airfield." Ivy looked out the window. A massive private jet, painted matte black with the royal crest in gold, sat on the tarmac. "Come," Richard said, holding out his hand. Ivy looked at his hand, large, scarred, powerful. Then she looked back at the dark road leading to Redridge, to the life of scrubbing floors and eating scraps. She took his hand. 3 days later, Ivy was living in a world she didn't recognize. King Richard's estate, the Iron Citadel, was a fortress built into the side of a mountain in the Canadian Rockies. It was cold, brutal, and magnificent. Ivy had been given a suite of rooms larger than the entire servants' quarters back home. She had clothes, soft cashmere sweaters, silk pajamas, warm boots that actually fit her. But she was also a prisoner, a pampered one, but a prisoner nonetheless. Richard had been busy with council meetings, but he checked on her every few hours. He would stand in the doorway, just watching her read or eat, ensuring she was still there. He hadn't officially claimed her yet. He said she was too fragile, that the mating bite would kill her in her current state. He was feeding her high-protein meals, trying to build her strength. On the 4th morning, Ivy was summoned to the infirmary. The royal physician, Dr. Orris, a kind, elderly woman with grey eyes, was waiting. "Good morning, Ivy," Dr. Orris said. "The king wants a full genetic panel. He believes there is a reason you haven't shifted." They took blood. They ran scans. Ivy sat on the exam table, swinging her legs, feeling like a fraud. She knew the truth. She was just weak. An hour later, the door slammed open. Richard marched in, holding a tablet. His face was a mask of fury. Dr. Aris followed him, looking pale. "Is it true?" Richard demanded, looking at the doctor. "The results are conclusive, sire," Dr. Aris said quietly. Ivy shrank back. "What? What's wrong with me?" Richard turned to her. The anger in his eyes wasn't directed at her, but it was terrifying nonetheless. He walked over and placed his hands on her shoulders, looking deep into her eyes. "Ivy," he said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage, "you are not wolfless. You are not a runt." "But I never shifted." "You never shifted," Richard growled, "because you have been poisoned." Ivy blinked. "Poisoned?" "Wolfsbane," Dr. Aris interjected gently. "Microdosing. Someone has been putting trace amounts of liquid wolfsbane in your food or water for years, just enough to suppress your wolf, to keep you weak, to stop your development. If they had given you any more, you would be dead. As it stands, your wolf is in a coma." Ivy felt the room spin. "But who? Why?" Richard's hands tightened on her shoulders. "That is what I am going to find out. Who prepared your meals at Redridge?" "We ate the leftovers," Ivy whispered. "But the cook, Mrs. Halloway. She always gave me a special vitamin drink in the mornings. She said it was to help me get strong because I was so small." Richard closed his eyes. A vein in his temple throbbed. Vitamins. He pulled out his phone. He dialed a number. "Prepare the tactical team," Richard said into the phone. "We are going back to Red Ridge." "Now?" the voice on the other end asked. "Now," Richard said, "and bring the interrogators. I want to know who ordered the poison, and when I find out—" He looked at Ivy, his eyes promising a violence that would make history. "I am going to burn their world down." Ivy touched his arm. "Richard, wait." It was the first time she had used his first name. He froze. "If we go back," she said, finding a courage she didn't know she had, "I don't want to hide in the car. If they did this to me, I want to look them in the eye when you find out why." Richard looked at her. He saw the fire igniting in her eyes, the first stirrings of a Luna. He kissed her forehead. "As you wish, my love. But you won't just look them in the eye. You will decide their fate." The return to Red Ridge was not a diplomatic visit. It was an invasion. King Richard's tactical team, a squad of elite enforcers known as the Death Dealers, secured the perimeter of the Red Ridge estate before Richard's SUV even rolled through the iron gates. Rain lashed against the windows, mirroring the storm brewing inside the Alpha King. Ivy sat beside him, her hands trembling. She had left this place, a servant, invisible and discarded. She was returning in a motorcade that cost more than the entire pack's annual budget, sitting beside the most powerful man on the continent. But she didn't feel powerful, she felt sick. The realization that she had been poisoned, betrayed by the very people who were supposed to protect her, was a pill too bitter to swallow. "Stay close to me," Richard commanded as the car stopped. "Do not leave my side. If anyone approaches you without my permission, Victor will handle them." Victor, Richard's beta, was a man of few words and lethal efficiency. He sat in the front seat, checking the load on his sidearm. "The perimeter is secure, Alpha. Trent is waiting in the main hall. He looks unwell." Richard opened the door. The scent of wet asphalt and pine hit them, mixed with the sour stench of fur radiating from the pack house. They walked up the steps. The servants, the same ones who had ignored Ivy for years, were lined up against the walls, heads bowed low, shaking. Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper who had snapped at Ivy about the sewing, looked like she was about to faint. When she saw Ivy walking beside the king, wearing a coat that cost thousands, her eyes widened in disbelief. Richard didn't spare them a glance. He kicked the double doors of the main hall open. Alpha Trent stood by the fireplace. He was trying to look composed, holding a tumbler of whiskey, but the glass was rattling against his teeth. Jessica stood behind him, looking pale and angry, her arms crossed defensively. "Your Majesty," Trent stammered. "This is unexpected. We weren't prepared for—" "Sit," Richard barked. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. The command hit Trent like a physical blow. The Alpha of Red Ridge collapsed onto the sofa. Richard guided Ivy to a chair opposite them, then remained standing behind her, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. "We are not here for pleasantries, Trent," Richard said, his voice ice-cold. "We are here for the truth. Bring me Mrs. Halloway." Trent's eyes darted to the side. "The cook? Why would you want—" "Victor," Richard signaled. Victor disappeared into the kitchen. Seconds later there was a scuffle, a shout, and Mrs. Halloway was dragged into the room. She was a stout woman, usually red-faced and bustling, but now she was ashen. She took one look at Richard and fell to her knees. "I didn't know," she wailed immediately. "I swear I didn't know it would kill her." "Quiet," Trent shouted, standing up. "You stupid woman, keep your mouth shut." "Sit down, Trent," Richard growled, his aura flaring. The pressure in the room intensified until the windows rattled. Trent fell back, gasping for air. Richard walked around the coffee table and crouched in front of Mrs. Halloway. He looked like a wolf inspecting a trapped rabbit. "Mrs. Halloway," Richard said softly. "You have been feeding Ivy Collins Wolfsbane every day for years. Tell me who gave you the order, and I might let you live." The cook sobbed, wringing her apron. It was the Alpha. Alpha Trent. He gave me the vials. He said Ivy was sick. He said she had a madness in her blood, and the medicine would keep her calm. He said if she ever shifted, she would go crazy and kill us all. I thought I was helping her." Ivy felt a tear roll down her cheek. "You knew," she whispered, looking at Trent. "You knew I wasn't broken. You made me this way." Richard stood up, turning his back on the cook. He faced Trent. The violence in the air was palpable. "Why?" Richard asked. "Why poison an innocent child? Why suppress her wolf? What were you so afraid of, Trent?" Trent laughed nervously, wiping sweat from his brow. "Afraid? Of her? She's a nobody. Her parents were rogues who died on a border. I took her in out of charity. Liar." A new voice cut through the tension. It was Victor. He had been rifling through a hidden safe behind a painting in Trent's office while the confrontation unfolded. He walked into the room holding a thick, leather-bound ledger and a small, dusty wooden box. "I found these in your private vault, Trent," Victor said, handing the items to Richard. "The ledger details payments to a black market apothecary for Formula 7. Concentrated wolfsbane. And this box." Victor opened the wooden box. Inside lay a silver locket and a birth certificate. Richard picked up the certificate. His eyes scanned the document, and his eyebrows shot up. He looked from the paper to Ivy, and then to Trent. A dark, terrifying smile spread across his face. "Rogues?" Richard repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr. "Is that what you told the pack?" He handed the certificate to Ivy. Her hands shook as she took it. She read the names typed in faded ink. Name: Ivy Rose Sterling, father. Alpha Conrad Sterling. Mother: Luna Elena Sterling. Ivy gasped, dropping the paper. "Conrad Sterling, the former Alpha. But everyone said he died in a rogue ambush along with his family." "He didn't die in an ambush," Richard said, his eyes locking onto Trent. "He was murdered. By his beta. By you, Trent." The room went silent. The truth hung heavy in the air. Alpha Conrad had been a beloved leader. 18 years ago, the official story was that a massive rogue attack had wiped out the Alpha and his family. Trent, the beta at the time, had heroically driven the rogues off and taken the mantle of leadership to save the pack. "You killed him," Richard deduced, piecing it together. "You killed Alpha Conrad to take his power. But you couldn't kill the child. The pack would have smelled the blood of an innocent on you. It would have cursed your reign. So you hid her. You changed her name. You poisoned her to keep her wolf dormant, so she would never present as an Alpha. You turned the rightful heir of Red Ridge into your servant." Trent's face twisted into a snarl. The facade was gone. "I did what I had to do. Conrad was weak. He wanted peace treaties. He wanted to share our territory. The pack needed a strong hand." "So you stole it," Ivy said, her voice gaining strength. She stood up. The fear was evaporating, replaced by a cold, burning anger. "You stole my life. You made me scrub your floors. You let your daughter treat me like garbage. All while you were living in my father's house." Jessica, who had been silent, suddenly shrieked. "She's lying! Daddy, tell them she's lying. She's just a maid." "She is an Alpha!" Richard roared, his voice shaking the foundations of the house. "And by the laws of our kind, she is the rightful owner of this land." Richard turned to Ivy. "The law allows for a challenge of blood, but in cases of treason and regicide, the king can pass immediate judgment." He paused, looking at her with intensity. However, this is your pack, Ivy. What do you want to do? Ivy looked at Trent, the man who had been the architect of her misery. She looked at the luxury around her, stolen from her family. I want him to suffer, Ivy said. Her voice was flat, devoid of mercy. I want him to feel as helpless as I did. Trent snarled, his eyes flashing yellow. I am still the Alpha here. I will not be judged by a cripple and a foreigner. He lunged. It was a desperate, foolish move. Trent shifted mid-air, his clothes shredding as he transformed into a large, brown wolf. He aimed his jaws at Ivy's throat. Ivy flinched, but she didn't need to move. Richard didn't even shift. He simply moved with supernatural speed, catching the brown wolf by the throat with one hand. He slammed Trent onto the floorboards with a force that cracked the wood. "You dare?" Richard whispered, his eyes glowing a deep, crimson red. "You dare attack my mate?" He squeezed. There was a sickening crunch. Trent's wolf whimpered, thrashing, but he was pinned. "Lock him in the dungeons," Richard ordered the death dealers who had swarmed the room. "And lock the girl Jessica in her room. No one leaves until Ivy decides their fate." As the guards dragged the struggling wolf away, Richard turned back to Ivy. She was staring at her hands, breathing hard. "Ivy?" he asked gently. "I feel—" She gasped, clutching her stomach. "I feel hot. Burning." Dr. Aris, who had travelled with the tactical team, rushed forward. "It's the antidote," she said urgently. "We started her on the cleanse this morning. The stress of the confrontation. It's accelerating her metabolism. The wolfsbane is leaving her system." "What does that mean?" Richard demanded, catching Ivy as her knees buckled. "It means," Dr. Aris said, checking Ivy's feverish pulse, "that 18 years of suppressed energy is about to explode. Her wolf is waking up, and she is going to shift. Tonight." The fever was unlike anything Ivy had ever known. It wasn't a sickness, it was a fire. It felt as though her blood was boiling, her bones rearranging themselves. They had moved her to the master bedroom, her parents' old room, though she tried not to think about that. Richard had cleared the room of everyone except himself and Dr. Aris. Outside, the storm had turned violent. Thunder shook the estate, matching the agony in Ivy's body. "It hurts," Ivy moaned, twisting in the sheets. Sweat plastered her hair to her forehead. "Richard, it hurts." Richard sat on the edge of the bed, his face a mask of torture. He held her hand, siphoning away what pain he could through their bond. But this was a biological process he couldn't stop. "I know, sweetheart," he soothed, wiping her brow with a cool cloth. "You have to fight through it. Your wolf has been asleep for a long time. She's angry. She wants out." "What if I can't?" Ivy whispered. "What if I'm too weak?" "You are the daughter of Alpha Conrad," Richard said fiercely. "You are the mate of the Alpha King. There is no weakness in you." Downstairs, the atmosphere was chaotic. With Trent in the dungeon, the pack hierarchy was crumbling. The sub-wolves, the betas and gammas who had supported Trent, were panicking. They knew a reckoning was coming. Victor entered the bedroom quietly. "Alpha," he murmured. "We have a situation." Richard didn't let go of Ivy's hand. "Speak." "It's the neighboring packs, the Black Creek Pack and the Silver River Pack. They heard about Trent's capture. They heard the king is here. They are gathering at the border. They claim Red Ridge is vulnerable, and they want to assist with peacekeeping. In reality, they are vultures coming to pick the carcass." Richard growled low in his throat. "They smell blood. They think because the Alpha is deposed, the territory is up for grabs." "I can hold the perimeter," Victor said, "but we are outnumbered if they coordinate an attack. We need you on the field, Alpha." Richard looked down at Ivy. She was tossing and turning, her skin radiating heat. He couldn't leave her. Not now. No, Richard said. I stay with her. Richard, Ivy gasped. She opened her eyes. They were no longer brown. They were flashing with a violet light, the mark of her lineage. Go. I am not leaving you. My pack, she gritted out through clenched teeth. This is my pack. Don't let them take it. Protect my home. Richard looked at her, seeing the queen she was becoming. She was putting her people before her pain. He kissed her knuckles. Victor, stay with her. Guard this door with your life. If anyone other than Dr. Oris tries to enter, kill them. Understood. Victor nodded, pulling a shotgun from his coat and taking a position by the door. Richard stood up, straightened his jacket, and let the alpha aura unfurl completely. I will be back, Ivy. I'm going to remind the neighbors why they fear the name Mercer. He stormed out of the room, leaving Ivy to her battle. Hours passed. The pain came in waves. Ivy felt her bones cracking, reshaping. It was agonizing, but there was a strange euphoria beneath it. She could hear things she never heard before. The heartbeat of the doctor, the rain hitting the grass miles away, the sound of Victor breathing by the door. Suddenly, the lights in the mansion flickered and died. The storm had knocked out the power. Stay calm. Victor's voice came from the darkness. Emergency generators should kick in within seconds, but they didn't. Instead, there was a sound of glass breaking downstairs. Then, the muffled sound of a struggle. Victor! Ivy called out, her voice raspy. Quiet! Victor hissed. He racked the shotgun. Someone is in the house. Heavy footsteps echoed on the stairs. Not the tactical team. These were frantic, stumbling steps. The door to the bedroom burst open. A flashlight beam cut through the dark. It wasn't an assassin. It was Jessica. She was soaking wet, mud covering her expensive dress. She held a large kitchen knife in her hand. Her eyes were wild, dilated with madness. You! Jessica screamed, pointing the knife at the bed. You ruined everything. Victor stepped into the light, aiming the shotgun. Drop the weapon, Jessica, or I will drop you. Get out of my way! Jessica shrieked. She's a witch. She bewitched the king. My father is in a cage because of her. We are going to lose everything. You lost everything the moment your father murdered hers, Victor said calmly. Now put the knife down. Jessica laughed, a high-pitched, broken sound. If I can't be Luna, no one will. She didn't attack Victor. She threw something. A glass vial shattered on the floor at Victor's feet. A thick, purple smoke exploded upward. Chlorine gas, Dr. Aris coughed, covering her mouth. Don't breathe it. Victor stumbled back, coughing, his eyes watering instantly. The gas was a blinding agent, stolen from the pack's arsenal. He fired the shotgun blindly, blowing a hole in the ceiling, but he was incapacitated. Jessica held her breath and lunged through the smoke toward the bed. Ivy tried to move, but her body was mid-transformation. Her legs wouldn't work. She was paralyzed by the shifting pain. Die, you servant rat! Jessica screamed, raising the knife. She brought it down, but the blade never touched Ivy's skin. A hand, covered in fur and tipped with razor-sharp claws, caught Jessica's wrist. Ivy looked up. It wasn't her hand. The pain in her body reached its crescendo. A roar built up in her chest, a sound that wasn't human. The suppressants were gone. The wolfsbane was burned away. With a sound like a thunderclap, Ivy's body contorted and exploded into motion. She didn't just shift, she erupted. Jessica was thrown backward across the room as a massive beast took the place of the girl on the bed. Standing on the mattress was not a normal wolf. She was gigantic, nearly as large as an alpha male. Her fur was a stunning, shimmering silver. like moonlight on snow. And her eyes were a glowing, electric violet. The silver wolf snarled, baring teeth that were designed to crush bone. Jessica scrambled backward, dropping the knife, terror seizing her heart. No, it's not possible. The legend of the silver wolf, the guardian of the North. It was a myth in Redridge, a story about the true bloodline of the Sterlings. Ivy, the wolf, didn't hesitate. She leaped. The silence that fell over the estate was heavier than the storm that had just passed. For King Richard Mercer, that silence was a terrifying, suffocating weight. He had felt the explosion of power through the bond, a supernova of agony and energy that had nearly brought him to his knees in the muddy driveway. And then, nothing. The chaotic noise of Ivy's pain had vanished, replaced by a stillness that chilled his blood. He didn't wait for the tactical team. He didn't check the perimeter. He bolted up the grand staircase of the Redridge Manor, taking the steps 3 at a time, his heart hammering against his ribs like a war drum. His boots left muddy prints on the expensive carpet, but he couldn't have cared less if the whole house burned down, as long as she was breathing. "Ivy!" he roared, his voice echoing through the vaulted hallways. He reached the landing of the master suite. The door to the bedroom was gone, torn off its hinges and lying splintered in the hallway. Victor was sitting against the wall, his face red and streaming with water as he tried to flush the chemical burns from his eyes. He looked battered, his coat torn, but he was alive. "Victor!" Richard slid to a halt, grabbing his beta by the collar. "Where is she? What happened?" Victor blinked, his eyes bloodshot and watering, but filled with a strange, reverence-filled awe. He pointed a shaking hand toward the gaping doorway. "She," Victor coughed, wiping his face. "She didn't need my help, Alpha. She handled it." Richard released him and stepped through the shattered doorway. The room was a disaster zone. The 4-poster bed was overturned. The heavy oak wardrobe had been smashed, as if it were made of balsa wood. The silk curtains were shredded ribbons, fluttering in the breeze from the broken window. The air smelled of ozone, ancient magic, and the sharp metallic scent of absolute terror. But Richard didn't look at the wreckage. His golden eyes locked instantly on the corner of the room. Jessica was there. The once arrogant girl who had sneered at Ivy merely hours ago was now huddled in a fetal ball, pressed tight against the wall. Her face was drained of color, her eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on the center of the room. She wasn't just afraid. She was broken. She was staring at a predator that defied her understanding of the natural order. And there, standing amidst the debris of her former prison, was the silver wolf. She was magnificent. She was terrifying. She was easily the size of a large alpha male, her shoulders broad and powerful, rippling with muscle beneath a coat of fur that shimmered like liquid moonlight. Where normal wolves were brown or grey or black, she was a blinding, radiant silver. But it was her eyes that stole the breath from Richard's lungs. They weren't the yellow of a beta or the red of an alpha. They were a glowing electric violet, the color of royalty, the color of the old legends. The silver wolf turned her massive head slowly. Her gaze moved from the shivering girl in the corner to the man standing in the doorway. When those violet eyes met Richard's gold ones, the world seemed to stop. There was no recognition of social rank. There was no king and servant. There was only the primal, undeniable recognition of souls carved from the same celestial stone. Richard felt his own wolf clawing at the inside of his chest, a desperate, frantic need to be with her, to touch her, to claim her. He couldn't stop it, and he didn't want to. He dropped to his knees, a guttural roar ripping from his throat as his bones cracked and reshaped. The transformation was violent and instant. In seconds, the human king was gone. In his place stood the Black Wolf, a creature of shadow and night, massive and scarred, a beast that had made entire armies tremble. But here, in this room, the Black Wolf didn't growl. He didn't posture for dominance. He lowered his massive head, flattening his ears in a gesture of profound respect. He whined low in his throat, a sound of longing. He approached her slowly, careful not to spook the new queen. The silver wolf watched him come. She didn't retreat. She huffed, a sharp exhale that sounded almost like a laugh, and stepped forward to meet him. When they touched, the air in the room vibrated. The silver wolf rubbed her muzzle against the Black Wolf's neck, inhaling his scent, accepting him. The Black Wolf rumbled a purr that shook the floorboards, licking the side of her face. The mating bond, which had been a fragile thread before, suddenly snapped into place like a steel cable. It was final. It was absolute. It was a physical weight anchoring them to the earth and to each other. Mine, Richard's voice echoed in her mind, possessive and relieved. Yours, Ivy's voice replied. It was clear, strong, and devoid of the fear that had haunted her human voice for so long. They stayed like that for a long moment, forehead to forehead, silver and black, balancing the energies of the room. But the reality of their situation eventually pressed in. The cold wind from the window was biting, and there were matters of state to attend to. Reluctantly, they pulled apart. The shift back to human form was seamless for Richard, practiced over decades. For Ivy, it was slower, leaving her breathless and shivering as the adrenaline faded. Richard moved with blinding speed, snatching a heavy velvet blanket from the floor and wrapping it tight around her trembling shoulders before she could even feel the cold. He pulled her against his chest, burying his face in her damp hair. "You're safe," he whispered fiercely against her ear. "I've got you." Ivy leaned into him, her legs feeling like jelly, but her spine straight. She looked at her hands, half expecting to see paws. She looked at the destruction she had caused. "I did this," she rasped, her voice husky from the transformation. "You defended yourself," Richard corrected, pulling back slightly to look into her violet-tinged eyes. "You defended your mate. You did well." A whimper from the corner drew their attention. Ivy turned in Richard's arms. Jessica was trying to stand, using the wall for support, her legs shaking so violently her knees knocked together. "Please!" Jessica sobbed, her voice a broken whisper. "Please, I didn't know. The legend. I thought it was a fairy tale." Ivy stared at her. Yesterday, this girl's words would have cut Ivy to the bone. Yesterday, Ivy would have looked down, apologized, and scurried away. But the wolf inside her was awake now, and she had no patience for cruelty. "Jessica," Ivy said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried a weight of authority that made the air thin. Jessica flinched as if struck. "Yes. Yes? Get up," Ivy commanded. Jessica scrambled to obey, wiping snot and tears from her face. "Pack your bags," Ivy said, her tone flat and final. "You and your mother. You have 1 hour to leave Red Ridge territory. Take whatever you can carry. Leave the rest. It belongs to the pack now." "Leave?" Jessica gasped. "But where will we go? We'll be rogues. We'll be hunted." Ivy's eyes flashed with that violet light again. "You should have thought of that before you tried to murder your alpha. If I ever see you again, if you ever step foot on my land, the silver wolf will not be as merciful as I am being right now." Jessica nodded frantically, choking on her sobs, and bolted from the room, stumbling over the debris in her haste to escape the monster she had created. Richard watched her go, his arm tightening around Ivy's waist. And her father? Trent? Ivy looked at the shattered window. "He stripped my father of his title and his life. He stole my name. He poisoned my body." She took a deep breath, He will face the council. Let him rot in a cell where he can see the moon, but never feel its light. Death is too easy for him. Richard nodded, a dark satisfaction in his eyes. It shall be done. He guided her toward the broken window. The storm clouds were parting, revealing a heavy, full moon that bathed the wet grounds of the estate in silver light. Below, the courtyard was full. Hundreds of wolves, the members of the Red Ridge Pack, had gathered in the rain. They had seen the violet flash in the window. They had heard the roar that shook the foundations of the house. They sensed the shift in power, the ancient magic that had returned to their land. They were waiting, silent, expectant, hopeful. Ivy hesitated, her hand gripping Richard's forearm. The confidence of the wolf wavered slightly, letting the human girl peek through. "They are waiting for their alpha," Richard said softly, sensing her doubt. "I don't know how to be an alpha," Ivy admitted, her voice small. "I don't know politics. I don't know strategy. Until this morning, I only knew how to clean floors and stay invisible." Richard turned her to face him, lifting her chin with his finger. "Ivy, look at what you did tonight. You faced your tormentors. You broke a curse. You cleaned the floor with your enemies. That is the first and most important lesson of leadership. Strength is not about what you know. It is about what you are willing to protect." He kissed her forehead, a lingering seal of his promise. "As for the rest, I will teach you. We will rule the North together." He offered her his hand. "Shall we go introduce them to their queen?" Ivy looked at his hand, the hand of the king who had saved her, who had seen her when she was invisible. Then she looked at her reflection in the shards of the mirror on the floor. She didn't see the servant girl with the mop anymore. She saw Ivy Sterling. She saw the silver wolf. She saw a survivor. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the cool night air. "Yes," she said, taking his hand firmly. "Let's go." Hand in hand, they walked out of the ruins of her past and into the hallway, ready to greet the dawn of a new reign. And that is the incredible transformation of Ivy Collins. From a wolfless servant scrubbing floors to the legendary Silver Wolf and Queen of the North. She didn't just find a mate, she found herself. Jessica and Trent got exactly what they deserved: exile and imprisonment. It's a perfect example of how true power isn't about bullying others, but about the strength you hold inside. If you enjoyed this roller coaster of Richards, revenge and justice, please give this video a thumbs up. We worked hard to bring this 7-part saga to life for you. What was your favorite scene? Was it Richard snapping at the gala or Ivy's first shift? Let me know in the comments below. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.